I watched my wife wrap her hand around his bicep and laugh like no one else was in the room. She didn't know I was there yet. It's funny how invisible you become when you're quiet. When you always say yes. When your job is to drive, carry bags, and smile at the right moments. I wasn't supposed to be at the party. She told me it was just for employees, but I checked the invitation in the trash, plus one was clearly allowed. So I showed up. I rented a tux. I shaved. I wore cologne I haven't touched since our second anniversary. And still, she didn't recognize me when I walked in. I mean that literally. Her eyes skimmed right past me, even though I stood just 15 feet away, near the floral arrangement shaped like their company logo. It was the lighting, maybe, or the haircut I got, or maybe I had finally faded so far out of her life that my presence didn't register anymore. She was standing by the rooftop railing with a man I'd never seen. Blonde, tall, gym cut like a magazine cover, the kind of jawline people carve into statues. She leaned into him, shoulders back, lips curled, like she was trying to be the best version of herself for someone brand new. I wasn't jealous. I was numb. You don't feel a knife when it first goes in. I stood there and waited for her to notice me. She didn't. Not even when I slowly walked closer. Not when I stood right beside them, pretending to check my phone. Not even when she said to him, "I swear, my husband would never come to something like this. He's too awkward for people like us." She said us, like she was part of a new club now. He smiled. She smiled. And then, like some cruel twist of fate, he turned, and I saw his face. And I knew it wasn't who she thought it was. She kept flirting. She whispered something into his ear, and then he turned his head fully and looked her in the eyes. That's when she stopped laughing. That's when her body froze. Because in that moment, she realized who he really was. She let go of his arm like it burned her. Her smile melted into horror. She looked at me, standing behind him. Back to him. Then back to me. And that's when she finally understood what I had done. That's when she realized. I set this all up. She didn't scream. That's what struck me first. There was no gasp, no slap, no awkward backpedaling like you'd expect in a moment of shock. She just stood there, frozen, her hands still hovering in the air, fingers curled, like her body hadn't caught up to her brain yet. Her smile had died a slow, agonizing death on her face, and all that was left was this ghost of confusion, horror, and the sick realization that she'd been played. And I watched it all. Every twitch of her eye, every flicker of her throat as she swallowed down whatever excuses were forming in the back of her mind. The guy, well, let's call him Ash, just stood beside her, smirking, completely unfazed. He wasn't who she thought he was, but he was exactly who I needed him to be. Let me make something clear. I didn't hire an actor. This wasn't some soap opera plot. I'm not that clever, or rich, or insane. Ash is real, very real. And the look on her face when she realized that made it all the more satisfying. Because what she didn't know, what she never knew, was that Ash had history with her. Deep history. Hidden history. The kind of past that people bury and swear to never speak of again. But I knew. I always knew. She thought she erased him from her life. She thought deleting old messages and pretending those years never happened was enough. But skeletons don't stay buried when you marry a man who digs for a living. That's the thing about being the quiet husband. People assume you're clueless. They forget that silence isn't stupidity. It's observation. I had been watching for months. Little signs. Delayed texts. Makeup on a Sunday morning when we weren't going anywhere. Sudden interest in fitness. The company retreats that were just for team bonding. I knew something was off. But it wasn't until I saw her browsing old names on Facebook at 1 a.m. after she thought I was asleep, that the dots began to connect. And one of those names was his. Ash Cormack. The name she swore never passed through her lips again. The one she claimed had traumatized her in college. The guy who, according to her own version of history, cheated, manipulated, and broke her to pieces. So why was she looking him up? Why was she smiling while doing it? I couldn't confront her. That would have been too easy. She'd deny it. Cry. Spin some story. No, this needed to be real. She needed to see the mirror held right to her face and watch herself shatter. So I reached out to him. It was easier than I thought. He answered in 6 minutes. Ash didn't even hesitate. Maybe he wanted revenge. Maybe he wanted her back. Maybe he just liked chaos. I didn't care. I told him about the party. Told him what she looked like now. What she wore. Where to stand. What to say. And now here we were. Me standing behind them. her frozen between a fantasy and a nightmare, and Ash just calmly sipping his drink like this was the best show in town. She finally turned to me. Milt, what is this? Her voice cracked halfway through my name. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the show wasn't over. Not even close. Janessa stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not like a wife looking at her husband, but like a stranger trying to make sense of someone she passed on the street and should recognize, but can't. Her mascara was perfect an hour ago. Now one side had smudged just slightly beneath her right eye, and her lips parted as if her next words were trapped somewhere between panic and performance. I could see her trying to calculate what expression to wear next. Sympathy? Guilt? Outrage? None of them would fit now. Ash stepped back slightly, giving her space like a gentleman, but I saw the amusement still dancing in his eyes. He knew exactly what he'd done, and she was finally realizing it. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I let the silence press down on her like a wet towel over a flame. Her coworkers were nearby, laughing, sipping, oblivious to the emotional demolition happening at the edge of the rooftop. It was almost poetic, how the world kept spinning while our little universe cracked apart. She stepped toward me, hesitant. Milton, why? Why is he here? I didn't answer the question. I just tilted my head and looked at her with the kind of tired curiosity you give someone who's lied to your face so many times. The lies themselves start to feel like wallpaper. Familiar. Quiet. Always there. You didn't recognize him? I asked softly. Her eyes flicked to Ash, then back to me. At first, I thought he looked like someone I used to know, but I didn't. I mean, I wasn't sure. You flirted with him. No, I didn't. You touched his chest. It was just a joke. You laughed like you used to laugh with me. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She had nothing. I leaned in, my voice lower than a whisper now, barely audible under the bass of the rooftop music. Did you think I was stupid, Janessa? That I wouldn't recognize when your heart left this marriage months ago? Her eyes welled up, and for a brief second I almost believed the tears were real. But then I remembered how many times she's cried before, how easy it was for her to produce emotion when it served her, how quickly she dried up when no one was watching. But here's the thing. I hadn't brought Ash here to expose her. Not really. This wasn't about embarrassment. This wasn't even about revenge. It was about confirmation. I had to see it. I had to know that I wasn't crazy. That the gut feeling, the late-night anxiety, the hesitations when she said, I love you, the way she locked her phone even in the bathroom, was real. I had to witness the moment she proved it. And she did. She reached out toward me, trying to salvage something, anything. Please, she whispered. Can we talk, somewhere private? I almost laughed. Now she wanted privacy? After letting a man she pretended not to know run his hand along her lower back in a room full of colleagues? No, I said. You've had enough private moments, don't you think? That's when Ash leaned in slightly and said, with a calm, amused tone, she told me you were boring, man. That you wouldn't even notice if she left. She gasped. I never said that. I turned to her. Did you? No, of course not. He's lying. But she said it. I knew she did. I didn't even have to ask. Because only someone who's heard that phrase before would have been crushed the way I was the moment he said it. And I was crushed. Deeply. Even if I had expected it. Even if I had planned for it. The trap wasn't for him. It was for me. I needed to know who I was married to. And now I did. Janessa didn't follow me when I turned away. That surprised me. For all the tears hanging on her lashes, for all the tremble in her voice, she didn't grab my arm or chase after me like in the movies. Maybe she thought if she stood still long enough, the whole thing would blow over. Maybe she thought I'd come back like I always did. That's what hurt the most, I think, that she still believed I'd fold. Even after everything she saw in my face, everything I'd set in motion tonight, she believed I'd be Milton the forgiving. Milton the weak. Milton the doormat. I didn't leave the party right away. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much. I ducked into the building's stairwell, 2 floors below, where it was quiet, and the walls still smelled like fresh paint and disinfectant. That's where the nausea hit. The kind that crawls up your spine before it lands in your stomach. I sat on a concrete step, head in my hands, the image of her touching him replaying over and over like a punishment loop. She didn't just touch him. She leaned in. She laughed that flirty laugh I hadn't heard in over a year. She gave him the smile I used to get when I surprised her with her favorite ice cream on a Tuesday. And then she tried to pretend it meant nothing. That's how I knew she'd done it before. Because the lies came out of her mouth too smooth. No hesitation. No stuttering. No panic. Just polished damage control. Like someone who'd rehearsed this scene in her head, just in case. I wanted to believe this was the first time. God, I wanted to. But the truth had been sitting with me for months. In little ways. A perfume I never bought suddenly running low. A hotel rewards card in the trash I didn't recognize. Her suddenly being too tired every night after staying late at the office for the third week in a row. It was all there. I just didn't want to be the guy who said it out loud. Because once you say it, it becomes real. And what I found 2 weeks ago on her old laptop, that made it undeniable. She left it unlocked one night while she was asleep. Said she needed it for a work call, but fell asleep scrolling Pinterest. I don't snoop. I really don't. But something made me open her downloads folder. I don't even remember what I was looking for. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself I was wrong. That I was just being paranoid. But instead, I found a folder with no name. Just a dot. Hidden in plain sight. Inside were photos. Selfies. Not nudes. Nothing explicit. Just intimate. Pictures of her in hotel mirrors. In conference room windows. On balconies I'd never stood on. She looked different in those pictures. Her eyes were alive in a way they hadn't been around me for months. Her lips weren't painted red like she wore for formal events. They were smudged, glossy, like someone had kissed her hard before she clicked the shutter. And in 2 of the photos, I saw his reflection. Ash. Before I ever spoke to him. Before I even knew who he was. He was already in her life. And I was the fool who thought she was just working late. I remember sitting in the dark that night, scrolling through each image like I was peeling off pieces of myself. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it with your own eyes. And even then, I didn't confront her. I couldn't, because I wasn't ready to end it. I wasn't ready to lose her, even after knowing I already had. So I did something worse. I started planning. The party was the perfect place. A public setting, just enough noise and alcohol to mask tension, but not so much chaos that people wouldn't notice a scandal. I didn't want drama. I wanted proof. Not for the world, for me. I needed to see her do it. With my own eyes. So that when I walked away, I'd never question whether I did the right thing. And now here I was, 2 floors below a rooftop where my marriage just died. Not with a fight, not with a scream, but with a look she gave to a man who wasn't me. The same look she once gave me on the night she said, I do. It took me 15 minutes to pull myself together enough to return to the rooftop. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a crowd whispering, maybe someone calling security, maybe Janessa crying in the corner, or storming out with her heels in hand. But when I stepped through the doors again, the world hadn't changed. The music was still playing. Laughter still echoed off glass walls. Champagne still flowed like nothing had happened. And Janessa? She was gone. Not just from the railing, from the entire party. Ash had vanished too. I scanned the room once. Then again. I didn't panic, not exactly, but something in me tightened. Not fear, something worse. Something like unfinished business shifting in my chest. I took the stairs this time, skipping the elevator just to breathe. But as I passed the lobby, I saw them through the revolving doors, Janessa and Ash, standing by a black SUV. They were arguing. She stood too close. He stood too still. And I knew, without hearing a word, that she wasn't denying anything. She was just trying to control the story before it slipped out of her hands. I waited until she walked back inside alone. She didn't see me until the elevator doors opened. Her eyes widened when I stepped in beside her. I didn't say a word. The ride up was silent for 2 floors. Then she pressed the emergency stop button. I turned to her, calm. She didn't speak right away. She folded her arms and leaned back against the panel like we were just 2 coworkers stuck between meetings. You planned this, she finally said, her voice steady in a way that scared me. You set me up. I stared at her, unblinking. I gave you the chance to tell me the truth. Months ago. She scoffed. And what? You thought playing detective would fix our marriage? No, I said. I thought maybe seeing your face when the truth hit you would make it easier to leave. She flinched. Just slightly. But then, something shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. She laughed. Not a full laugh. Just a sharp, sarcastic puff of air through her nose. You think you're the victim in this? Milton, you checked out of this marriage years ago. You buried yourself in your spreadsheets and coding marathons and whatever sad little life you have online. You don't even see me. I looked at her carefully. You're right. I don't see you. Not anymore. Not the woman standing in front of me. Her jaw clenched. She stepped forward. You know what hurts the most? It's not that you embarrassed me tonight. It's that you waited this long to grow a spine. You let it rot for months just so you could catch me slipping. No, I said, finally raising my voice just enough to make her flinch. You were already on the floor. I just turned the lights on. She was shaking now, but not from fear. From anger. From exposure. And then, just when I thought the worst was over, she said it. Milton, it wasn't just Ash. My stomach dropped. What? There were others, she said, her voice flat. You want the truth? There it is. Ash was a rebound after one of them ghosted me. He wasn't even the worst one. You think this is all about him? You think this started with him? I couldn't breathe. I backed into the elevator wall like someone had punched me in the chest. I stayed, she continued, her voice eerily calm now, because I felt guilty. You were nice. Safe. But you made me feel like I was dying, Milton. Every day? You were a walking apology. You never challenged me. You never wanted more. You just existed. I stared at her like I didn't know the person in front of me. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I never had. She stepped toward the panel and pressed the emergency stop again. The elevator resumed its slow climb. And before the doors opened, she turned her head slightly and whispered, You should have left before this got messy. Then she walked out, leaving me in that silver box, surrounded by the weight of every word she said. And I realized, this wasn't just betrayal. This was war. I don't remember taking the stairs back to the parking garage. I don't remember unlocking the car, or sitting behind the wheel, or even turning the key. I just remember the silence that followed her confession. That elevator, those words, they kept echoing even as I sat alone in my Prius, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. 3 men before Ash. Maybe more. She didn't even flinch when she said it. Like she'd been waiting to get it off her chest. Like it was some great relief to finally admit it to the man she shared a mortgage with. The man who washed her hair out of the drain. The man who once spent 6 hours building her IKEA bookshelf while she scrolled Instagram and complained about her coworkers. I stayed in that car for an hour. Not crying. Not raging. Not planning. Just unraveling. I thought I'd already hit bottom. But turns out, there's something worse than knowing your wife doesn't love you. It's realizing she never did. That she stayed not because she believed in you, but because she pitied you. Because you were so small, so forgettable, so safe, that you became her moral charity case. I drove home on autopilot. The roads were dark. The city was quiet. I didn't play music. Didn't turn on the AC. I just listened to the sound of my own breathing and tried to understand how I got here. How a man becomes so invisible in his own marriage that his wife cheats on him half a dozen times and still feels superior. The porch light was still on when I pulled into the driveway. Of course it was. I was the one who programmed the timer last winter. She wouldn't even know how to change it. I sat in the car a while longer, watching our living room through the front window. It looked clean, calm, domestic. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. And I knew. I couldn't sleep in that house again. Not with her. Not under that roof. Not beside the woman who looked me in the eye and said, You should have left before it got messy. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I walked in, grabbed my work laptop, my charger, my wallet, and the jacket I liked, and walked right back out. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. Not because it was symbolic or dramatic, but because it physically repulsed me to keep it on. I drove to a cheap motel 20 minutes away. Paid in cash. The guy behind the counter didn't even look up from his phone. I don't think I said more than 3 words. The room smelled like disinfectant and microwave popcorn, and the walls were the color of damp sand. But it was mine. It was quiet. And it was mine. I collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, hearing her voice again and again in my head. Ash was a rebound. You were a walking apology. You should have left before it got messy. Messy? I hadn't even started. Because that night, lying in a motel bed at 2:47 a.m., I realized something that scared me more than her betrayal ever did. I wasn't broken. I wasn't devastated. I was awake. For the first time in years. And I started thinking, not about saving anything, or healing, or fixing, but about reminding her who exactly she underestimated. About what happens when the quiet man finally opens his mouth. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity. And I was going to get it, no matter what it cost. I didn't go to work the next day. Didn't call in. Didn't email anyone. Didn't explain. The idea of opening Slack and pretending to care about code reviews or QA tickets felt absurd. What was I going to do? Debug some back-end issue while my marriage was smoldering in the rearview mirror. Instead, I sat in that dim motel room, lit only by a half-flickering lamp and the glow from my laptop, and I watched. Janessa didn't know I had access to the cloud backups from her phone. It was an old sync feature we set up years ago when she was always losing her photos. She forgot about it. I never did. It wasn't live sync, but enough of her messages, screenshots, and media backed up in batches every few days. Enough for me to see patterns. Names. Phrases. What I saw in those archives made the party look like child's play. There was Lyle, a guy from a work conference in Dallas. Theo, a Pilates instructor she apparently trained with for 6 weeks. One of them even texted her a photo of a plane ticket. She was going to meet him in Arizona during a wellness retreat she claimed was fully sponsored by her company. That retreat happened 3 months ago. I remember because I bought her new luggage for it. I scrolled and scrolled. There were no nudes. No explicit photos. Just coded messages, subtle language, hotel receipts, voice memos that sounded innocent but weren't. It was all suggestive, not incriminating. But I didn't need evidence. I already had the truth. What I wanted now was strategy. I started writing. Not a revenge plan. Not a manifesto. But a record. A timeline. I logged everything I found. Dates, messages, names, inconsistencies. I created a spreadsheet and color-coded it. Not for court. Not for friends. For me. Because if there was one thing I could still control, it was the narrative. And I was tired of living in hers. Then I made my first real move. I logged into our shared bank account and quietly transferred half of everything into a separate checking account. One I'd opened years ago when we talked about maybe investing in property together. She'd never touched it. Probably forgot it even existed. Then I checked our credit card statements. I wasn't looking for infidelity. I was looking for leverage. She'd been charging things to my name. Hotel stays, ride shares, even a spa day that coincided with one of her work-late excuses. All booked under my card. That gave me options. After that, I called a lawyer. Not a flashy one. Not some billboard face with teeth too white to be trustworthy. Just a quiet, discreet family lawyer 2 towns over who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I booked a consultation under a fake name. Cash only. I didn't want Janessa to get a whiff of what was coming. Because I wasn't leaving in flames. I was walking out of this like a ghost. Quiet, thorough, and untouchable. By noon, I was drinking black coffee at a greasy diner and going over my spreadsheet like it was a case file. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was calm, focused, sharp in a way I hadn't felt in years. That's what betrayal does. Once you've been hollowed out completely, there's room for something else to grow in its place. Resolve. By 2 p.m., I was sitting in a rental car outside her office building, watching the revolving doors. I had no plan. I just wanted to see her walk out. Just wanted to see if she carried herself any differently. If she looked over her shoulder. If she felt the weight of what she'd done. She didn't. She walked like a woman who owned the sidewalk. Phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other, designer sunglasses framing the same face I once thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. Now I saw it for what it was, a mask. She didn't see me. I didn't want her to. I waited until she drove off in her car, then stepped out and entered the building. And for the next 35 minutes, I had a very polite, very productive conversation with her HR department. I never said a word about cheating, but I did ask for copies of her travel logs. Claimed I was auditing tax records and needed clarification on mileage and reimbursement forms. The woman behind the desk gave me everything I asked for. I thanked her, and I left with a folder under my arm that I hadn't even known I needed. Because the one thing Janessa never considered was that I'd stopped being the man who begged. Now I was the man who documents. And I wasn't done. Not even close. I never served her the divorce papers personally. I didn't want to see her face when she read them. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of crying, or arguing, or pretending to be surprised. So I had them delivered to her office, neatly sealed, with a note clipped on top that simply read. I finally left before it got messy. The silence that followed was beautiful. A clean, wide silence. She didn't respond right away. No angry calls. No texts. Not even one of those long, manipulative emails she used to send after our worst fights, full of half apologies and twisted logic. Just nothing. Until the third day. She called. I watched the screen light up in my hand. Her name. Still saved under Janessa Heartsuit, because I hadn't bothered changing it yet. And I let it ring. It buzzed again 5 minutes later. Then a text. Can we talk? Please. I wasn't ready. I didn't think you'd really leave. It was strange. For so long, those words would have wrecked me. They would have made me believe she cared, made me second guess, made me forgive. But now they felt small, like a fire trying to burn in a room without oxygen. I didn't reply, because I didn't need to. I had already begun to reclaim my life. I moved out of the motel and into a small rental unit on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just clean floors and quiet neighbors. A landlord who didn't ask questions. I bought a second-hand couch, some new sheets, a toaster. My name was the only one on the lease, and it felt like freedom. I even started seeing a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to make sure I never let someone like her build a home inside me again. The sessions weren't easy. I had to unpack years of silence. Years of being the safe one. The forgettable husband. The emotional wallpaper. But slowly, I started seeing the truth. I wasn't weak because I loved her. I was strong because I survived loving someone who never truly saw me. And for the first time in years, I began to remember who I was before her. I started painting again, something I hadn't touched since college. Nothing serious, just small canvas work at night, while jazz played in the background and my phone stayed face down. I walked more, cooked more, spent real time with people who actually cared. And then, one Sunday afternoon, while standing in line at a farmer's market, I met someone. Her name was Delaney. She wasn't flashy or loud. She wasn't the kind of person who lit up a room just to dominate it. She was kind, grounded, the type of person who listened when you spoke and laughed without performing. We talked about honey. No, really, there were samples at the table, and she gave me a recommendation. We laughed about the weird texture. I told her I liked the orange blossom kind. She said that meant I was secretly a romantic. She was right. We've been seeing each other for almost 3 months now. No drama, no games, just realness. Simplicity, a kind of quiet joy I'd forgotten was even possible. And Janessa? I heard she filed her own petition a few weeks later. No contest, no demands, just a clean signature and silence. I never answered her calls. Not once. Because when you finally wake up from the kind of love that nearly kills you, you don't go back just because the silence gets loud. You don't go back because the ghost of who you were begs you to. You move forward. You rebuild. And you remember. Some endings are the kindest thing that ever happened to you. And some women teach you, painfully, who you're not meant to be, so you can finally become the man you always were.